Education. It's an essential part of American life. Whether you are a student, parent, teacher, administrator, or simply a former student, we are all influenced by schools. And we recognize the value of education. We want it to be the best it possibly can be because it certainly does affect our futures. As you probably know, there's an ongoing debate about education, specifically standardized tests and evaluating students. Which, in short, is a good thing. Debate means people care. If no one cared, there'd be no arguments over how to make education better. Evaluating what students are learning is an important part of the education system. There needs to be a way to see if children are learning what they should know, and correct the system or offer assistance if not. In theory, standardized tests accomplish this goal. One test to see if all students in a grade have learned what they should have learned. Impersonal, unbiased, computer scored. However, the weight put on standardized test scores is compromising this answer. Too much emphasis is put on testing, and too many decisions are made based on scores alone. Eliminating standardized tests as a method of evaluating student knowledge and teacher performance will improve the American educational system. For a little background, in 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act required standardized testing in all 50 states. Some states were already administering standardized testing to evaluate student learning, but by 2017, 40 states were using scores to judge teachers and 30 states judging administrators. Scores from these tests are used to determine grade promotions, qualify students for advanced classes or special services, evaluate teachers, evaluate administrators, evaluate school policies, allocate funds, and a host of other consequential decisions. This brings us to the first major problem with standardized testing, the way it has come to dominate the educational system. The value of test scores evaluate school administration. So the administration pressures teachers to make sure their students can succeed on tests, spending hours of classroom time on review, test prep, rather than new learning. The education value goes down when teachers start teaching to the test and not to mastery of the subject, which affects the students, then affecting grades on standardized tests. It's a bad circle. A study by American School of University of Education found that over 80% of teachers believe their students spend too much time taking standardized tests. This graphic shows the resources that standardized tests consume. Hours of student time, hours of teachers' time, and a staggering $1.7 billion. Could that time and money be put to better use? I'm sure you could think of a few ways. The second problem with standardized tests is the test itself. These standardized tests that we stake entire future of students on are inherently flawed. According to studies, tests do not measure knowledge, but instead measure economic factors, ability to memorize, and test-taking skills. Christopher Tenkin, an associate professor of education, leadership management, and policy at Seton Hall University, notes, test scores are heavily influenced by factors outside the students' and teachers' control. The factor showing the clearest correlation to test scores is socioeconomic status. His studies of various schools in the US and Canada show that the test scores can be accurately predicted based only on the percentage of poverty in the community. This one demographic factor has more impact than student-to-teacher ratios, curriculum, quality of administrators, hours spent on test prep, or any other factor within the control of school personnel. Not only are standardized tests biased against economic status, but they also have a cultural lens. The writers of standardized test questions do the best they can to make sure the questions are unbiased, that everyone answers them the same, but their particular upbringing and world views mean test questions will have a slight bias according to their outlook on life. These questions will favor people with similar outlooks. This inherent bias aside, studies show that standardized tests favor a particular type of thinker. Quoting Alfie Kohn from the journal Cultural Logic, One study classified elementary schools as students as actively engaged, if they went back over things they didn't understand, asked questions of themselves as they read, and tried to connect with what they were doing and what they had already learned. And as superficially engaged, if they just copied down answers, guessed a lot, and skipped the hard parts. It turned out that the superficial style was positively correlated with high scores on the Comprehensive Test of Basic Skills and the Metropolitan Achievement Test. I have a question. Would you rather have an actively engaged student or a superficially engaged student? And which student is more likely to be successful in college or the workforce? Do you want a superficially engaged employee? How about a superficially engaged surgeon operating on you? Conformity to test methods that generate the best results is not creating adults that we expect or want. If standardized tests are not an effective way to evaluate student learning, what is? What about teacher-by-teacher way of evaluating? If teachers gave their own tests on the material learned and then graded the individual students on their understanding with the letter grade, finishing the semester with a test on all the material learned, then giving an overall letter grade averaging all the individual tests. Oh wait. Why are we introducing an entire new system of evaluating students' learning when we already have a perfectly good one? Why don't we trust our teachers' judgment? Of course, there is some margin for subjectivity with teacher grading, but is it any more than the standardized tests? Unlike the tests, there is a solution for this. Committee grading. 2 teachers and an administrator. This would make sure all the students of the school are being graded on the same scale. What if a teacher is biased against a student? They just don't like them, they're noisy in class or whatever? Again, committee grading fixes this. Or even one administrator reviewing all the grades to make sure students are being accurately evaluated. In conclusion, I think we can all agree that education is important and that it needs to be monitored to ensure quality. In theory, standardized tests would accomplish this, but are not being used in an effective way. Standardized tests have come to dominate the educational system in a very detrimental way. Students' future and opportunities to school funding and teacher tenure, the consequences of standardized tests are much too high. Standardized tests are not an accurate measurement for students' knowledge or achievement. They are highly influenced by external factors, have an inherent bias, and favor a narrow way of thinking. A better way to monitor whether our educational system is working is evaluating students on teacher grading and high school GPAs. Replacing standardized tests with teacher evaluations would remove the pressure and consequences of a single test and account for more than what can be measured by tests. Eliminating standardized tests would also fix the emphasis to teaching to the test instead of teaching to the mastery of the subject. So what can you do? Talk to your schools, your state board of education. You can even call your congressman. Make those around you aware of the issues that standardized tests cause. Ultimately, we all need to choose the value of education over evaluation.